Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Heal with Kat podcast. My name is Kat, and I am your host. And welcome to a little bit of a different vibe today. If you're looking at the visuals or hearing the audio, I am traveling and I don't have any of my equipment, but we are just rolling with it this week because we've got to get this information out to you. This week's episode with my guest, Maggie Parr, is a transformational one, to say the least. Now, before I get into what this episode is about and introduce my guest, I need to share with you a bit of a trigger warning. This episode is all about self-harm. We talk about abuse. We talk about self-harm, obviously. We talk about power and authority. We talk about some intergenerational trauma attached to it as well. And so if this is not a supportive conversation for you, if it might be triggering, I'd like you to check in with yourself and just make sure, does this feel good for me or not? If there is even an inkling of a no, please pause it, save it for later, or just skip right over it and wait till next week. I've also got a backlog of like a ton of 70 plus episodes that you can listen to. So just a bit of a trigger warning for you, but it was so kismet to meet Maggie. I feel like I just met soul family. And I feel that often about a handful of guests that I've had on the podcast, which is just such a gift. I'm so grateful to Spirit every day that I get the opportunity to meet these people. Maggie is an artist. She is a self-harm expert and an author. And she's created this book, A Creator's Guide to Self-Harm, to support people who are going through their shadowed side of their self-expression. And she guides you through the journey of how to reclaim your power with your expression, with your creativity, if you struggle with self-harm. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I also share a very personal experience that I've had with self-harm. And this is a very vulnerable relationship on Maggie's part and on my part. And we hope that this information is only here to support you and help you. And so when you're listening to this week's episode, keep an open heart and an open mind, and know that you are not alone in your experience. And that if you know someone who might benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Please encourage them to check out Maggie's book and to look into her work. Also, we get to learn a little bit about the intergenerational patterns with self-harm and expression that Maggie shares with us. And we even get to hear about her other job that she does, where she is an artist for a huge international brand. And it's so interesting to hear the kind of yin and yang with her experience with being an artist. So with that, guys, please help me welcome Maggie Parr to the Heal with Kat podcast. All right, guys, I have my wonderful guest today, Maggie Parr, on the Heal with Kat podcast. I am so grateful to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
You know, I was so intrigued when I saw your Podmatch profile because I thought, wow, this is a really interesting topic that is you've like niched down on this topic of
so
self-harm.
niche down. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's beautiful because I think we're kind of coming into a world where we need to be talking about the awareness of these things and the origination of them and how to process them. And I love your connection to the creative part of it as well. And I'll just come out openly before we get into the episode and share with my community that I do have a history of some self-harm in the past. And so it's really just a touching topic. I would love if you could start off the interview today just by sharing with our community your background, your story, and how you got into this work.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. In writing this book, A Creator's Guide to Stopping Self-Harm, I've been amazed at how many people, friends I didn't know had a history with this, or people who currently have a daughter or a granddaughter or a grandson who are struggling with it. So I'm really encouraged by the fact that it's been helping a lot of people already. And that's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book I had wanted to read because I struggled with self-harming starting at age 4 and switching to razor blades at 12, having relief off and on, getting a lot of outside help, and then being free from it for about 10 years and then relapsing again in my 40s, and then really getting down to the root causes. And there was so little out there to help people like me. First of all, when I was starting at 14, that was 1981. That was a long time ago, and there was nothing. And then when I was struggling again in my mid-40s, there was nothing for mature people. It was all for teenagers and adolescents. And so the book I wanted to read was How Does Somebody Stop? A book by someone who did stop and heal, and positive. Like, I read memoirs by people who had self-harmed, and they were very triggering. It was, and not very clear about how they got there. And then the other books were by clinicians who had had patients who were self-harming. So it was one step removed. And I needed to hear from someone who'd done it. How did they do it? And I couldn't find that. So when I got through it and healed, I wrote the book I wanted other people to read that might help them.
It's interesting how we all, like I work a lot with family dynamics and this topic of belonging, and yet
Mm,
it is my deepest pain. Yet it is the thing that I teach the most of. And
of course.
yeah, when people are
Yeah,
afraid of their pain, there's that we talk about in the healing
right.
space, just how much it can be your superpower in so many ways as well.
Exactly. I love that. My phrase I use so often with this book is the wound holds the answer.
Mm.
So we can't run from it. That the wound holds the answer to all the questions we're asking in our lives. Like you talk about in family constellation therapy. We just continued these cycles from generations, and yet as we run away from the wound, we're running away from that the part of ourselves that we need to listen to. So that's such an important journey.
I know that with my experience with self harm, it happened in moments where I did not have the words to express the pain, nor did I have the
Right.
space to express it.
Mm,
And that inflicting it upon myself allowed me to feel something.
yeah.
And when I read the title of your book, I was so interested because I could see the correlation between expression
Hmm.
and self harm. Tell us about your book, why you titled it the way that you did, and a little sneak
Hmm.
peek into what it entails.
Yes, it's interesting you talk about expression because some have called cutting a voice on the skin.
Ooh.
It's a way to express something nonverbal, a pain that's overwhelming that we don't have words for. And the role of creativity is to get us back in touch with this childlike ability to express without judgment. And it's our human birthright, creativity, but using creative exercises to get back to go inside the wound and hear what it's trying to say. To me, that's a very spiritual process as well, and creative. I think cutting is creative. It's a creative way to deal with unbearable feelings, and using creativity then to heal from cutting not only aids in the healing, but it leads us back into ourselves and the part that's missing.
Ooh, I'm getting like emotional. It just, you
Mm,
just, if only we had the tools to express the
mm,
feelings we were having, how sad it is. I think back on that part of me that felt that the only way I could express myself was to hurt myself. It just, it brings up a lot of grief and sadness. And also, I'm assuming in your book you offer pathways to success. And so what are some of the pathways that you offer the readers?
It goes on a journey that mirrors my own journey. So it starts with the basics of why people cut, what things help, what helped me, and then also grounding techniques. Before we go into this work, I want someone to feel like they have tools in case they get in a little too deep. I always advocate that people are in therapy with a qualified therapist who knows how to deal with this. And then you start easing into creativity. It's not, you don't have to be an artist to do this work. It's just being willing to draw a stick figure and a dialogue bubble, to scribble with a pencil. I have people start with a special journal and a special tool because a lot of people use special blades or instruments of harming. So we're trying to replace that and give that part of us new avenues of expression. And then we go into different exercises. For me, it started with meeting the cutter was like a dissociated part, in that sense very spiritual because it wasn't material. It was only existed inside my head, but it was very real for me. And so I accessed that through drawing and painting. I would do rage art, scribbling, or I would cut into the gesso on the canvas slits, and then when that dried I would paint red paint into the grooves, and all these ways of trying to understand what the cutting was about and what it was trying to say. And I even sometimes drew on my arm with a red pen what was going on. My therapist asked me once, if you were to write out what you're trying to say instead of cutting, what would you write? And I wrote the word help.
Ooh.
And that was really what this part was trying to say. It was frozen in childhood and things that happened, and needed to be heard, needed to be loved, back to health. And so creativity and drawing and painting gave me a way to do that. The exercises that I developed and that I got from other people, I now share in the book, in this journey of meeting that part, maturing it, coming up with new techniques to deal with the urges, getting away from the cutting if you're ready to do that, and then finally healing and being of service to others.
Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Mm,
Being of service to others is the greatest way, I think, to kind of like tie together the recovery journey because it really,
absolutely.
it's, yeah, it's an embodiment of everything that you've learned on like a deeper
Mhm.
level. Hey everyone, it's Kat popping in during the episode today to tell you about my free cycle breaker quiz. Do you ever feel like you're the black sheep of your family, or maybe you find yourself stuck in the same family patterns or dynamics over and over again with no relief? Well, what if I told you you could transform that role into something really, really powerful? When you take my cycle breaker quiz, I help you understand the childhood coping tools that are showing up in your adult life today. And by understanding how you show up with your family and the role you play, this can be the portal into understanding the patterns of your lineage. Ready to embrace your role? Go to catdow.com/cycle breaker to take the quiz or visit the link in the show notes below. Your transformation from black sheep to cycle breaker starts right now. I have a couple of follow-up questions to what you just said, but before I get into those, can you explain to the community what self-harm is and if there is self-harm
Mhm.
outside of cutting? Like, would eating disorders potentially be
Right.
self-harm of some kind? Can you
Absolutely.
get into that?
Yeah, I focus on cutting and burning in this book because that's what I dealt with mostly. I also dealt with bulimia for a period of time. I was a drug addict and alcoholic, and I got sober almost 33 years ago. So I think they all go together. It really was just using myself as a punching bag for all the things that I couldn't express outward. And also, I didn't want to harm other people. My father took in his abuse growing up and then channeled that into harming his kids instead of other avenues. And I didn't want to do that. So harming myself was the next best step, oddly enough. So does that answer your question?
Absolutely, it answers
Okay.
it, and it even brings up this deeper thought of the challenge. You know, I think about every guest I have on the podcast. I really try to channel any kind of ancestral or family dynamic
Yes.
components to it. And for me, when I think about my self harm history, and even some others in my close circle of self harm from recovery and things. There is a challenge with authority figures, and it's like
Mm,
we don't have the power to say how we feel with the authorities in our lives, so we
right.
intend then inflict it upon ourselves.
Right. That's a very common reaction. I agree.
And what something I wanted to ask earlier is you talk so eloquently about these parts of us.
Hmm.
And I think that's important to touch on when it comes to self harm, that they are
Hmm.
parts of us. Could you go into more detail about that?
Yeah, my therapist helped me deal with the concept of parts. We all have different parts. I think Richard Schwartz developed family systems therapy and sort of made that official, but I didn't do that type of therapy. I just found the part on my own. And I used to call it the cutter, and now I see it was my little tomboy who was being abused, and I renamed him Faith. He likes to be called him, even though he's really a girl, but it was who I was at that age. I wanted to be a Tom. I wanted to be a boy because I didn't like what was happening to girls. So Faith, and I got Faith tattooed on my arm where I used to harm myself. And so yes, it was a different part. And when I would cut myself, it felt like something was taking over, and I literally could not resist. It was like watching from the end of a reverse telescope. So that was a part. My therapist said it was like had its own ego development. I did not have dissociative identity disorder. I didn't lose time with the part, but it definitely was my brain's mechanism for dealing with impossibly unbearable situations in a creative way. That's where creativity comes in again. So it took a very creative and different approach in order to be able to heal and reintegrate that part of me.
What was one thing that you learned to love about yourself through that parts work in connection to self harm? Like, what did you rediscover about yourself that you were like, whoa, that's actually not negative. That's actually a really positive,
Yeah.
beautiful part of myself.
The warrior part of me, because that part of me loves swords. I'm actually have a dagger necklace right now. That's the favorite. And very creative. That part is very protective of me, very creative. When I gave that part another task, which was doing the paintings, the big artworks like these behind me, I'll show you like this one.
Oh, wow. My
So I do
goodness.
very expressionist artwork that can be somewhat confrontational, and that's Faith's work.
It's just, it's so interesting how a lot of healers and people that are rising through their pain into this more service part, it
Mhm.
is confronting for a lot of people. And I think the MO of our society right now that we're trying to evolve out of is stuff it down, like don't think about
Mhm.
it, like it's just normalize it,
Right.
disassociate from it. And I love that you've channeled it into what you call confrontational art
Yeah,
because it makes you feel something. And
right,
our feeling parts of us are the greatest parts that we give up,
right.
especially in our family systems. We give up the feelings part because feelings are just too much for our
Mhm.
families sometimes.
Yeah,
Um,
I do for a living. I do a lot of Disney art, and designing theme parks and Disney characters. So someone said to me once, "Maggie, your work is like, oh." I said that's the perfect description of the breadth of my work.
wait, we have to get into this. So, wait, that is amazing. So, you do
Yes.
theme park art for Disney?
I did for many years, not so much since the pandemic, although I still do portraits of Disney characters and famous artworks. But yeah, I
Oh,
designed theme parks. I designed a carousel in Shanghai Disneyland. I've designed hundreds of murals and portraits in California Adventure and Shanghai, Hong Kong. So I was a Disney Imagineer for many years. So I used this imagination, and I had this track of doing very cheerful, kid friendly, family friendly stuff, and then this other thing that was going on in my life, and trying to juggle those two things was the challenge until I wrote this book and started integrating everything in my life into one story.
well, my next question was going to be that was the process of writing the book cathartic for you and
Yeah.
discovering these parts of you, and it sounds like it has been.
Yeah, it wasn't discovering so much as documenting, but what I discovered in the book was written in the spirit of service to help others. And I realized that my purpose for my art is to be of service to others. It's not, yes, to express and to heal, but it's only complete once I turn around and help another person. And I've done so much mentoring in my life through recovery programs. And when we teach something, it solidifies in a different way. And it also, I was listening to your podcast about what you do in the family constellation therapy, and I was really struck by healing backwards and forwards 14 generations. And I have gotten to that realization in the writing of this book that my purpose is not just within this lifetime. I'm actually redeeming the lost potential, creative potential in particular, of so many of my ancestors, the ones I know about and the ones I don't. One of the famous stories in our family is of my grandpa, my Finnish grandpa, who saved all his money as a young boy to buy a violin. And he was so excited, but his mother was Laestadian, which is a very strict religion in Finland. And when she saw the violin, they're not allowed to play music or dance, and she threw it into the fire and
Oh.
destroyed his violin. And that one story for me embodies this whole anger and frustration and inability to express ourselves creatively, the really not even having the right or the opportunity. And so in telling this story, tying my trauma to generations, giving myself a new voice and encouraging other people to have a new voice, I feel like that's healing this pain for generations.
That's a beautiful intergenerational connection and tie through.
Yeah,
And so many people actually don't know about their lineage. Sometimes
right.
people come to sessions with me and we're finding it out in the process. And then
Ah,
you get a hit, you should ask anyone, your great uncle, is he still alive? Maybe. And then, we uncover, but
love
your
that.
story sounds a lot like Coco, the Disney, the movie Coco.
Oh yeah, I did a poster for Coco once.
Yeah.
I always think of like the work I did for that character.
Yeah. It's very synonymous. And
Yeah. Hmm.
just I want to acknowledge just us together here. What a gift of a cycle breaker that you are for your
Cycle
lineage. You've
breaker.
turned
Love
your
that word. Yeah.
yes.
That's an identity type of word.
Well, and I think the challenge is that many of us we identify ourselves as black sheep, and there's such a
Hmm.
negative connotation to that. I did my whole life. Oh, I'm different. I'm this. I'm that. And
Mm,
in many ways, my differences were actually the gifts that I was here to provide the family. And it's
right.
not happening directly to the family, but it's happening through me into the generations to come.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
there's that new tie through the future lineages.
right. And there's more power in that term. When you say black sheep, it almost makes you sound like you're this one little tiny dot in the sea of other color. And then that feels like you're never really going to succeed, or this is like an anomaly, as
Yeah.
opposed to cycle breaker. This is like a superhero feeling. It's like much more power in that it feels more permanent to me.
Yes, yes, it is. It's more of a grounded identity, I think.
Hmm.
When you're creating your artwork and you're channeling everything, these are hard, difficult emotions. Now, do you wait until the moment that you are having the difficult emotion and you just run to the canvas, or is it something that you've taken time to process and then you go to the canvas to unleash it?
When I was going through it, I would often do it in the moment. And having healed from this work, and I consider myself healed in the sense that I'm present. Like I still have difficult days, but I'm not caught up in this generational past trauma stuff. Now I do a lot more thinking it through. Like right now, I'm conceiving a new series, and it starts to blossom in my mind, and I imagine it and I sketch it. But when I was in it, I really did. I don't have it nearby, but I had a journal that I just used for faith for the rage art. And when I felt it come on, that part of me, instead of cutting, I would just draw it. Sometimes I even break through that page to the next page. And again, it was that same version of some words saying help or it did happen. And then I would scribble over it because that wasn't allowed. But at least drawing it, I had proof that the message was there. I started affirming for that little kid part of me. It did happen. I'm helping you. So a dialogue started. The creativity is what got that going.
What's your relationship to judgment? Because now that we're talking about art
Mm-hmm.
and kind of this correlation to authority and power and harm, it's like then I'm kind of thinking about the word judgment here, and
Yeah.
I feel like it's interesting to understand how that comes up in the self-harm journey as well.
Yeah. In talking with people and in reading about it, I have found that there's no one correlation um, reason why people cut. A lot of people are sexually abused, like I was, but not necessarily. Um, but there does seem to be this thing of your reality denied in some way, your voice silenced. And what that does is that implants, I mean, I call them shitbirds, excuse my French, but
I love that.
I have an image of these like nasty birds smoking cigars, but they'll say things like that didn't happen or you're lying or, and they're actually embodiments of literal messages I got to silence my voice so that I wouldn't say, hey, what you're doing is wrong, or hey, stop that. Um, Instead, the adults who were also traumatized and abusing had been abused and been taught that themselves. So they consciously or unconsciously said things like, why are you making me do this to you? Or this hurts me more than you, or, so that I took on their voices and they're not true and they're not mine. So that's where judgment comes from. It's literally implanted voices and messages that don't serve me anymore.
I was just leading a workshop earlier today around the topic of belonging and
Mm.
how we will confuse what love really means. And sometimes our family members will call abuse love, like, and just what
Uh,
you said, if I didn't love you, I wouldn't hit you, or these weird things that then become embedded, like you said, in our subconscious, which
yeah.
then makes me want to ask the question, is self-harming a mental illness?
It's not. It's not a mental illness. It's a symptom. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. That's actually in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's listed as what is it called? NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury, and a condition for further study, which just says they don't know enough about it. But it's a symptom of either trauma, or some people, cutting is a symptom of borderline personality disorder. That wasn't the case with me, and with actually most people who cut themselves. That's another misunderstanding about it. But no, it's a voice on the skin. It's a way of saying something's wrong here. I need help.
I wish I hope that our society can get to a place where we don't look down on people who have mental illness or the
Yeah,
expressions of their mental illness.
right.
It makes me think of a lot of the clients that I work with. when they were children and they cried a lot or they had a lot of needs and they were inconvenient and those needs weren't listened to, kind of
Mhm.
makes me think it's along the same path of something like that.
Yes. Yes. It's just an extreme behavior that scares people. And so a lot of times people have negative reactions based on that. And it can be scary. It's usually not associated with suicidal actions, but it can be accompanied by it or lead to it if untreated.
Mine was around the same time of that also happening at the same
Mm,
time. And it was
mm.
just a desire to escape.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was just,
Escape the pain.
yeah, it was so painful. I
Mm.
could not
Sorry.
imagine if that was my life at 24, 23 or 24, what was
Mhm.
50 going to feel like? Was I even going to make it to 80? Was I going to
Yeah.
be in pain forever?
Yeah.
And the heaviness of that, I
Mm.
just needed to escape.
Yeah.
Escape.
Yeah.
If I know someone or someone listening knows someone who is self-harming, what can they do to support them? How can they be
Mhm.
conscious and kind in their awareness of it? Sometimes we see something wrong and we want to just call it out. That might not always be the best solution. So what do
Right.
you recommend?
That's a really good question, especially since so many people who approach me know someone else. And I tell people what would have helped me what did help me. A couple people did help me reach out to me when I was a teenager. The best approach is loving and non-judgmental. Um, and whatever fear you may have about what that means or might mean, keep that to yourself and just be loving. And do you want to talk about that? Is there any way I can help you? Or how about we go talk to someone? I see you're in pain, and I just want to listen.
And what if somebody is listening and they are self-harming? What should they do?
Well, if you don't have a therapist, I definitely suggest finding one. If you can't afford with your insurance, there's often sliding scale clinics. I certainly use those a lot in my years. You can go to stoppingselfharm.com, which is the website that I developed with the book. I'm not a therapist, but it's my experience of how I stopped. You can try the exercises, but definitely tell someone you trust that you feel safe with, because it grows in isolation, and it's a cry for help. You're trying to say something, so go say it to someone.
When I self-harmed for the first time, I was in an outpatient eating disorder facility.
Mm,
And I was assigned a therapist for my time there. And
mm,
I remember going to her and letting her know. I pulled up my sleeve and I said, "This is what I did. I've never done
mm,
this before. I don't think I'm doing very well." And her
mm.
response was, "Well, let's do a CBT worksheet on it."
Mm.
So I did
Cognitive
my
behavioral therapy. Mhm.
so I did the worksheet. I felt so numb and disassociated from
Mm.
that experience. And then at the end of the our little session together, she said, "Oh, and by the way, insurance is kicking you out, so you have 2 more days here."
Great. Yeah,
And
not the approach I would take with
so,
anyone.
and this is my biggest fear with mental health issues is
Mhm.
that these professionals are being told if there's a problem, give them a brochure. If there's an, I
Or
wish I,
pill.
or exact pill.
Right.
Well, we can talk about the pills I was put on in that
Oh,
program
I
too. That
bet.
I was put on anti-bipolar medication because
Oh,
my binging and and I had to be watched within 30 minutes of taking it so that I didn't have a seizure because I
yeah, that's not
mean,
good.
medication has a time and a place, and I support the people that
Mhm.
feel that they need to be on it. But
Mhm.
in that moment, the reason I share this is because what I really needed someone to do is just give me a hug and say, "You look like you need some help,"
Yeah,
and meet me emotionally in that.
right. And
Man,
just
that
say,
would
"Honey, I feel your pain. Talk to me about it. I'm here with you. I'll listen." That's all.
to be
I won't
held
try to
because
fix you or shame you. Just tell me what's going on.
yes, yeah. What is a piece of loving guidance or advice that you would give to someone who's struggling like that today?
I can feel it in my heart right now, which is it is possible to recover. There will be better days. Go tell someone, find some love. Other people have been through it, and you can get through this too.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So, my last question is, how would someone heal from self-harming outside of the therapy? What can they do today, right
Hmm.
now, in this moment? They're listening and they're like, well, shit, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
Maggie has helped me identify what's really happening inside. What can they do?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I've used that with somebody who texted me, found me and texted me, which is draw the part of you that wants to cut. Draw that figure, little stick figure, doesn't matter if it's a person or a thing or an animal. And then I want you to draw that figure's higher power. What is
Oh,
their savior, their angel, their spirit guide, their God? And you'll be surprised once you let that little being draw their spirit guide, then it goes from there because when you're starting to listen and then you let them create the comforter, the spirit, the angel, and they can turn to that angel in the future and they'll have a little drawing of it that makes it real.
I love that you're talking about this. You're like in the
Mhm.
right place. Like we are the people that will receive that message. And it reminds me, after I went through, I can never watch Silver Linings Playbook ever
Oh,
again because that's the movie that I self-harmed to. And I remember
oh.
after watching the movie and after going through the couple of
Mm,
days afterwards, I found Hay House Radio. Do you know Hay
mm.
House?
Yeah, yeah, Louise
I
Hay.
found Hay
Mhm,
House Radio and I just started binging Hay House
mm,
Radio and I started doing meditations. And it was right after that time where I was meditating and I asked my grandparents and my guides, they've
mhm,
acted as guides for me since they passed, to
mhm,
send me like a sign or something that they're with me. And I'm in the
mhm.
meditation and I'm closing my eyes. And then all of a sudden I get this like inner desire to open my eyes. And there is a white feather just boop, boop,
Whoa.
boop, boop.
Ah,
And I was like,
interesting.
whoa, like I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Like I have been fed these like lies that I
Mhm.
like, and God didn't seem tangible to me. And Jesus was
Right.
like, I don't know. I've been like
Yeah,
raised in a
yeah.
Catholic family. I got issues with this. But that white feather, it instilled in me that there is something, there was an energy that was far greater
Mm.
helping me than I could see. And the guides, my guides, have been such an integral piece of my well being. And I just love that you've explored that.
Right, and they showed you a sign that you would believe. And that's the thing is this part of us that does not trust anyone, authority, or even us, needs something they can believe in, and trust that part of you to show you what it is.
Mm. This was a wonderful conversation. I am
Yeah.
so grateful to have you on the podcast.
Fun.
Everybody, go look at A Creator's Guide to Stopping Self Harm. Maggie, how can people connect with you? How can they purchase your book? How can they even, do you offer like work? Like, can people work with you? Like, what are you offering for the community?
I'm developing that. There's issues with safety and liability because I'm not a trained therapist, but yes, I'm developing workshops and one-on-one. But you can go to stoppingselfharm.com. You can get the book on Amazon. You can see some of my Disney work on maggieparr.com. There's all kinds of ways to contact me. People have done it, and then what I do is I find a way to help the person. It's nothing formalized yet.
Oh, I'm excited for you to share your gift in a deeper way because I
Thank
know so
you.
many people will use that. It would even be so cool for you to bring it into some more like corporate structures or places where
Mhm.
where the Western philosophy is like pressure cooking everybody and they just need
Right,
somebody light to come in and be like,
right.
"Hey, let's move the brochures over to the side."
Right. Draw a picture of your higher power from your kid's point of view.
Yes, yes. Oh my gosh. Well,
Why
thank you
not?
so much for your guidance and just your wisdom with
Thank you, Kat.
everything. And everybody go check out Maggie and connect with her. You will not be disappointed.
It's been a pleasure. I really appreciated, enjoyed
Oh,
talking to you.
thank you.